Well, with me in the studio are two experts who follow the nitty-gritty of Brexit and how and when it might happen, if ever it does. Vicky Price is an economist and a member of the advisory board of the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, OMFIF. And Ian Greenstreet is a London-based investment banker and international risk expert who is also chairman of Infinity Capital Partners. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. I'll start with you, Vicky. A lot of discussion in Britain about what Brexit means and how to extricate the UK from that relationship. Is there a lot of discussion in Europe about what Brexit means?
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, that the Europeans have said they're not going to even start any negotiations until the UK pushes to the button to leave, which is basically Article 50, which it is supposed to invoke if it actually is serious about leaving the EU. It has to give notice that way. What we know is that it takes sort of 2 years to get to the point where if you haven't reached an agreement, then you have to do something else. It may, of course, take much longer, but there is a real issue for the UK. We're having elections in 2020, unless there is an early election, and so far our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, has said she doesn't want that. So time is running out, and the real worry of the Europeans, but also loads of people in the UK and businesses and financial sector participants, is that we just don't know what's going to happen and what Brexit actually means.
Now, Ian, the Telegraph newspaper website is saying in an exclusive story that EU officials believe that Britain will give up on Brexit if they make the negotiations tough enough. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's an immensely complicated process. You know, first of all, it's much easier to join a club than, in fact, resign from the club and then have to write all the rules from scratch. And if you can imagine, you know, the UK will have to essentially, one, negotiate with Europe to develop new rules, two, negotiate with all the other parties that Europe has previously negotiated on behalf of Europe, on behalf of the UK. That is the WTO, that is sort of, 39 different trade deals with 65 different countries, including, the likes of Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, Afghanistan. It is an immensely complicated process.
Of course, as you mentioned there, Vicky, we're also learning today that the Financial Times on its front page says that Europe is spurning Britain's plea for guidance on Brexit until, as you mentioned, Article 50 has been triggered and the negotiations proper begin. So the jockeying for position is well and truly underway.
I think there are some discussions going on. There is no way that British officials in Brussels are not talking to other countries and also, of course, the European Commission itself and trying to see what the various MEPs are thinking. The problem, of course, we have is that there are 27 countries and they have particular views on what the UK should be doing. And the interesting thing is, just looking at those 27 around that table, what you see is that there is a whole group of Eastern Europeans who feel they have been, in many ways, ignored. Their voice isn't heard. They've had to deal with this really serious migration problem, all these, tens of thousands of people coming through their borders, which made a number of them to have sort of barriers for them. And then you have the southern European countries, which feel very neglected themselves, and they have been under huge pressure to cut the deficits, reduce growth, in fact. This is basically what's going on, because in reality, there is no way in which they can meet some of the conditions of the bailouts that they have received unless they really tighten up very significantly. So there are resentments everywhere. Now, how you can have a view, a European view, of what the best deal we as Europeans say we're going to give to the UK, I just can't imagine.
Now, Ian, given what she's just said, should EU leaders, we just saw pictures of the meeting there in Slovakia, should they now crucially show that they can do things together, that they can cooperate on security, on immigration, on jobs, and that everything happening in the EU should not be seen through the prism of Brexit?
Well, I think, if you put yourself in the shoes of the 27 countries, absolutely. Developing cohesiveness, having a clear vision, avoiding other countries following Britain's example of a Brexit is absolutely critical. Making sure that the funding of the union is correct. So absolutely, if you're in the European shoes, definitely.
So, Vicky, presumably the sort of thing we saw there, where Britain is not present, is going to become increasingly common going forward.
Well, this is really a more informal meeting. It's not the sort of usual summit which takes place. The summit takes place normally October, and there is something else going on in December. So I suspect you're going to be there for that. But obviously, if there is a meeting which is trying to see what people's views are about how to deal with the UK and Brexit, then we won't be there. But it is still a shock. We're still members, and we're not at the table. And that, of course, will mean that our influence will decrease over a period of time. And the longer we leave that, of course, the less likely we are to get anything that actually might make sense. And there are two groups around, of course, in the UK. Some who say, including actually the Europeans, let's leave it for as long as possible, because by then, who knows, Europe may have changed. Everyone will see that actually Brexit is not good news, and maybe we'll change our minds. Maybe there'll be another sort of referendum, who knows.
Right.
And there are others who say, let's do it now, because the uncertainty and the time that you need to get to the next election is such that you've absolutely got to get going. Unfortunately, most of the protagonists don't seem to agree on how we move forward.
Well, fair to say that Europe is facing a major, complicated existential crisis. Vicky Price from OMFIF and Ian Greenstreet from Infinity Capital Partners, thank you very much indeed to both of you.